Thank you for tuning in to the Okinawa Karate Podcast. I am Josh Simmers, coming to you from the birthplace of karate, Okinawa, Japan. Once again, doing a Zoom interview because of this world pandemic, and we can't really have any visitors here to Okinawa. My guest today, I wanted to interview when he was in Okinawa in January. Some things came up. I had to leave the island, unfortunately, for a family emergency and head back to the States. And he's now not permitted to visit Okinawa like the rest of the world. In the future, he will be, but for now, we're going to go ahead and do another one of these Zoom interviews. My special guest, please state your name for the record, sir.
Michael Hagen.
Michael, thank you so much for joining me today. Like I said, we wanted to do this when you were here back in January. Got together, ate some traditional Okinawa soba.
Oh, yeah.
Orion beers at the dojo bar, and had a
Good
really
times.
good time. We had planned on doing a sit-down interview. We had chatted about it before you got to Okinawa. And then, I had to up and leave real quick for a family situation, unfortunately. And now I'm waiting for you to come back. Actually, you were supposed to be back here already.
That's right. I was actually supposed to come in about a week and a half. I was supposed to be back on island for a weekend of training. And we'd arranged to set up a time during that time. But, my flights are canceled. Obviously, situation's not ideal for anybody. So we're going to do the best we can.
We don't know when it's going to happen now, do we?
No. I'm hoping that I could be able to get back there by late summer, early fall, if things settle down. So Japan opens back up.
Yep. We're all hoping for that. I know of a handful of people that had to cancel plans in March and April, some that had to cancel plans in May, and even in June. The person I interviewed last week and 3 times before that, Sensei Michel, he was trying to come over here in June. We don't know when it's going to happen now, but there's a lot of people in the same situation. So I think that October will probably be pretty busy for us here in Okinawa. That's pretty much the month of karate here. Karate no Hi, October 25th, but that whole month they slam every tournament or seminar in that month, and I think this year is probably going to be pretty inundated with it. So
I imagine so.
You avoid October, actually, unless that's the only time that you can get here. But so listen, normally I would give the intro and say the backstory, how you and I met, but you actually, I'm going to let you do that because you knew about me before I knew about you, and then there's some other people that got into the mix there. So I'm going to let you run with it.
Okay. So I was living in Virginia up until last year, and I had a pretty long commute. So I would try to find podcasts. Audiobooks never worked out for me. So podcasts, and obviously looking for good karate and martial arts related podcasts. And there in the Apple Store, came across the Okinawa Karate Podcast. Started to listen to it, listen to all your episodes with Jesse, with everybody that you'd interviewed. And I have a good friend of mine named Jonathan Seavey, who you may know.
Yes, I do.
In fact, was a previous guest, I believe, on the podcast. So I had mentioned it to him. I was like, "Hey, man, you need to check out this podcast." He from his home to his dojo is about an hour. So I knew that he's got time in the car, and it was like, "Hey, you should check out this podcast." This guy Josh, he's doing a lot of good stuff. And he's like, "Okay, yeah," and and I don't know how everything happened, but then you had another guest on, Master Robinson from Pennsylvania, a Taekwon Do instructor. Well, as that happens, I had actually met Mr. Robinson at Jonathan's dojo grand opening when he opened his new dojo. And it turns out that Jonathan had started in Taekwon Do, and that was his first instructor. And so then when you interviewed Master Robinson, Jonathan realized that you were from the same area, where he grew up in that area also. And then I believe he got in contact with you. When he was on island. He goes to Okinawa at least once a year, and you guys interviewed, and then you contacted me afterwards. So it was this roundabout way of, "Hey, I met your friend Jonathan." I'm like, "Yeah, I told Jonathan to contact you," and then how we got started there.
Yep, small world. That was very interesting. I tell you what was so surprising to me is, like I've mentioned to you, I mean, the town that I grew up in is really small, Tunkhannock, Pennsylvania. And Jonathan is more than 10 years younger than I am. So I never knew him growing up, but I did not train at Robinson's martial arts because there was, that was the more expensive dojo. There was really only two, and that was the one that my parents couldn't take me to. So I went to this other one that was American freestyle karate. It was more kickboxing than karate, but it's what I went to. And then to find out that this guy started it, and he grew up. I grew up in a small town. Actually, the town that Jonathan grew up in was even smaller. I mean, really, he would travel to my town just to see a red light. That's how it was. And then to find him here in Okinawa, and we hit it off, and actually he and I went out and enjoyed a bowl of soba while he was here as well.
I'm pretty sure, we torture each other when whoever's in Japan or in Okinawa. We often will. He would FaceTime me when he was at the izakaya after training, with his mug of Orion.
Yes.
And so we torture each other frequently with pictures of pork belly and draft Orion beer. So
that's what we do for the people that are not here, right?
Yeah, it's what you do.
That's right. So let's jump into your history. Let's hear.
Okay.
You've got a long history, and I heard some of it. I didn't even hear all of it. Usually, I tend to know a fair amount about my guests before I interview them because I've spent time with them, which is kind of a prerequisite for me when I do interview somebody. Typically, I like it to be here in Okinawa, so we're face to face, we're sitting together, and it's always been someone that I've already known. The only person I've not known was Jesse Enkamp,
right?
Which he's well known anyway. He's got a lot of information out there on the internet, but he's the only one that I didn't get to talk to ahead of time. That's just kind of my style for these interviews. I really enjoy knowing the people ahead of time. So I know a bit of your history, but not all of it. So let's hear it, man. Let's lay it out there for the guests.
Well, so, I wasn't, a lot of people started when they were really young. I didn't actually start martial arts until I was 18. I'd always wanted to do karate, but my mom wouldn't allow me to. She thought, I'm the oldest of four, and she's like, you're going to use that on your brothers and sisters, right? And her being the oldest of five, I believe, she, probably a little short-sighted in that, she should have recognized that siblings don't need karate to pick on their younger siblings, right? But when I turned 18, graduated high school, I started to look around, and there was only one karate school in our town where I grew up in Fairbanks, Alaska. But a friend of mine from high school, when I said I was looking for someplace, had said, well, there's this Taekwondo Do school that I went to my whole time in high school. And I was like, really? I didn't know that you did Taekwondo. She's like, yeah, the instructor there is phenomenal. Right. And so I went there, and it was the hook, right? That thing that, nobody's good in the beginning, but the thing that hooks you, right? I played sports all through high school, basketball, soccer, baseball when I was younger. And none of it ever maintained my focus or my interest. And then when I started at this Taekwondo school, it was like the light bulb, like this is it, right? And it wasn't so much the Taekwondo itself, but it was like this martial arts. And so I did that for 1 year, my freshman year of college. And during that time, there's the students that you see that have that spark, right? And I think my instructor saw that in me, because I think within 3 or 4 months, he told me one day, he's like, hey, I want you to come on Saturday. I'm like, okay. He's like, well, I got this thing we're doing on Saturday. So I show up on Saturday. It's me, him, one of the other instructors, who at the time I think was like Sandan, and this Army scout who was a Kali guy, a Filipino or Indonesian Kali, Eskrima, Arnis, that type of thing. And so it was the four of us doing this like private class in Kali. And me, I was blue, green belt maybe, or yellow belt or some, 6 months doing martial arts. And here I am with all these other people. And so it just was like that thing that kept me going. So my freshman year of college, I also started learning Japanese in college. And about Christmas time, or January, right after Christmas, I was chosen, or I picked to go on a student exchange to Japan. And that wasn't originally part of the plan. That just kind of happened. I went to an informational session, got some information, and the next thing you know, it's September, and I'm getting on a plane to Nagoya, Japan. And my only focus was, when I get there, I don't care what anything is, but take me to the karate club. Like I saw on the brochure, right, the information that the school sent, that you have a karate club. So take me to the karate club. So sure enough, my first week, I'd been there 3 or 4 days, tried to get over jet lag. School starts, and somebody from the school, the student exchange, the foreign student exchange program, walked me down to where the dojo, where our school was. And we had our dojo, the Shorinji Kempo dojo, and then the little huts where we had our bushitsu, our club rooms. And it was old, easily 30, 40 years old, like original, probably about 30 years old, I think. You know, hardwood floors, no air conditioning. I mean, like the original hardwood floors, you know, heavy bag that had been hanging there for 20 years. One little mirror on the side in the corner by the front. And they walked in and they introduced me, and that was kind of my start with karate, was the Nagoya Gakuin University Karate Club.
So
and
what made you decide to take Japanese in college? Was this a passion of yours early on, or is this something like, hey man, I guess I'm going to take a language and it just happened to be Japanese?
Oh no, the Japanese was definitely planned. So again, growing up in the 80s, Japanese economy was booming, right? That was before the bubble. And you know, you think about all the Japanese companies that were buying up Hawaii, buying up Southern California. And I had in my mind, I was a business major at first, and I had in my mind that I'm going to go to school, I'm going to learn Japanese, I'm going to start an international trade company, and I'm going to get rich doing international trade with Japan. That was the original motivation. You know, as a kid, I'd always had an interest in Japan. Always had an interest in martial arts. I wouldn't say that it was any one thing. You know, some people will say, like, I saw Enter the Dragon, that was it. Or I saw The Karate Kid and that was it. Or there was this one thing. For me, it wasn't any one thing. It was this combination of a large number of things that all fed into this. I'm going to go to university and I'm going to learn Japanese because of this reason, with these other interests on the side kind of driving it in a way. But going to Japan to learn karate was never the motivation. In fact, going on a student exchange was completely not planned, right? Life throws these little twists at you, right? So not planned, had no interest, but my Japanese instructor was a grad student. And he would tell us stories about his student exchange time, and he went to Tokyo, and he would tell us these stories. And so that's what prompted me, like, okay, well, they're going to have this informational session. You know, maybe that sounds fun. Like, never thought of that, but I'll go listen to this information. And then sure enough, it's me and 2 other kids come September getting on a plane to fly to, or maybe just one other from my school, I think, fly to Nagoya and go. And our university was outside Nagoya. It was actually not in Nagoya City. It was in Seto, on the top of a mountain on the border with Gifu Prefecture. And we were the only ones that lived on campus. All the exchange students lived on campus in a foreign exchange student dorm on campus. But I was also closer to the dojo, so I guess it worked.
So when you went over there, you had only been training in Taekwondo.
Right, for 1 year.
As a formal art, Taekwondo.
Correct.
So when you went to the dojo there as part of the university, what did you train in? What was it, Shotokan?
No, it was actually, again, I had no idea of this at all, like styles or anything. It was Shito-Ryu. There was a relatively small organization called Nihon Karate Do Kenwakai, based out of south of Nagoya, by where the airport is now, on the Chita Hanto, the Chita Peninsula, called Kenwakai. And They had branch dojos all over Aichi Prefecture, a couple in Gifu, but they're basically just like a local organization with multiple branch dojos. But somehow our university had become affiliated with them. Yeah, so it was Shito-Ryu, but I didn't know that at the time.
So what about the kata that you were doing, or what about the types of training that you're doing? Compare that to what you were doing back in Alaska.
So we did some kata, but it was mostly kihon. So our average club day was, average club day, which is every day, was club day. We had about 2 to 2.5 hours of training, and the vast majority of that was kihon. Standing kihon, moving kihon, and then kumite practice. And that was it. As part of the university league. And so we fought and we did kihon. So kata, I did heian yondan, seinchin, and basai dai.
Wow.
That was pretty much it. There were other athletes. One of my good friends was actually, his father owns a dojo in Gifu. He comes from Wado-ryu. He was a high school athlete as well. And so he did his Wado kata. There were a few others that had high school experience, and they did whatever kata they did before. Either Shotokan, there was a Shotokan. One guy did a couple of Goju kata, Kururumpa and things like that. But our main kata that we did as a group were heian yondan, seinchin, and basai dai, itosu no basai.
That's a pretty interesting mix of kata. But
yeah, well, they're the seinchin and basai dai are the shite-gata, the mandatory kata for kata in JKF and in student league tournaments. And then our kihon kata that we did was heian yondan. But even then, we would go through like maybe once a week doing kata. The rest was just kihon over and over and over and over and over.
Welcome to Japan.
Right? Well, and see, that was it, right? What I'd done in Taekwondo for that year was pretty much, your typical city dojo. Do a little kihon, do a little kata, do a little kumite. Friday nights was like sparring night, some kicking drills, whatever. But it did not compare at all to the level of kihon practice that we did in the karate club. That's it's that environment where you're just over and over again, nonstop.
Right. And the instructors there, were they pretty strict on you guys as foreigners? How'd you feel about that? Were they treated everybody the same? Or did you feel tested?
Yeah. Yes. All of that. So I had a little bit of a unique experience. When I went, I was the only foreigner, the only foreign student in the karate club. So there had been one of the students who left the summer that I arrived. There had been one other foreign exchange student in the club. And he, great guy, but I think his karate experience in the club was kind of just something that he wanted to do for fun. So he didn't take it as serious. He just kind of would show up when he wanted, or may not show up for like 2 weeks at a time and then just show up to training and whatnot. So that was the expectation that they had when I arrived, was this, okay, Michael's here now. Let's see what Michael does.
Yeah.
Right?
Another guy gene going to be the same way as the last one.
Exactly. So it wasn't, there was not really any like harassment or hazing or teasing directed towards me. Once they figured out, okay, how old are you? What grade are you in? Okay, you're a sophomore. Okay, you're a ninensei. You're here, right? So they stuck me in with the sophomore students, the other sophomore students, and that became my year, my group. But there was a definite 6 months of let's see what Michael does, right? Is Michael going to come when we have our gashiku, is Michael going to show up? When we have the the little training camps before the tournament or at the beginning of the semester when it's, we train 2 hours at lunchtime and then after class we come back and we have 3 hours of training at night. Is Michael going to show up for all 3 nights? Is he going to come on Saturday? And so there was definitely that. And I didn't, I didn't realize that that's what was going on at the time. My Japanese was still atrocious at that time. The first 8 months, I could barely understand what they were saying because, you learn Japanese, and I was taking language classes. But, karate words are all, you don't learn those in the classroom, right? You don't know what any of karate words are. So
you were learning formal Japanese in the classroom, not so much conversation, especially dojo conversation, slang.
Right.
Yeah.
So at first there was a lot of just looking around to trying to keep up with what everybody was doing. So I got there in late August or very beginning of September, and it was about February that I really started to feel that, okay, now I'm part of the club. So in March, I went home, and for spring break, the Japanese school system, they have March is like a break for a month before school starts again in April. So I took that time. I flew home for a couple of weeks, and I was only supposed to be there for a year. So I was supposed to leave in July or August to fly back. And I went to my professor who managed our program, and I asked to extend for one more semester and to stay until December. And that was the best decision that I could have made. In fact, I should have just asked for a whole nother year, but I asked for another semester, and she agreed. We got the school to agree to it, that I could stay, and we got the school in Japan to agree to allow me to stay. And both on my karate and my Japanese language, that was key, because it was over that summer. I stayed in Japan and I didn't go back home over the summer. I stayed there and I just did an arubaito teaching, English to, housewives or high school students and whoever wanted to do it. My friends all got together and they got their summer, whoever's high school student needed a tutor, and I would get on my little scooter and I would go over there for, a couple of hours, or I would go here. And that summer and into the fall was everything just started to click. I started to understand the language. I started to really kind of get my place in the karate club, and so where they really accepted me. And in the fall, before I left, the sophomores had become juniors, and so we become juniors. Well, the seniors retire and the juniors take over. And in our club, at least at the time, I don't know if they're still doing it, they had what we call kanbu kotai, which is the changing, kind of like the changing of the guard, where the seniors retire from club activity and the juniors take over. And we had a 3-day experience. Let's put it that way. We had an experience that culminated with, at least on my part, a visit to the emergency room on Saturday. But it was, I was in there, right in there. And even that, though, the test continued at the end, because I remember the captain saying, Michael, you don't have to do this. You're going home. This is not something that you have to do. And I was like, no, I'm here. I'm a junior. I may be leaving soon, but I'm going to do this with my dokusei, right?
Right.
And it was great. I got home from the emergency room, and I walked into my dorm, and one of the other exchange students, one of the Japanese girls that was there visiting and helping us, she was walking across the living room, and she stopped and looked at me and said, "Were you in a car accident?"
What was the trip to the emergency room for?
So it wasn't as dramatic. So we had, the very last thing we did was, for Kanbu Kotai, was the juniors go over on one side and everybody else goes on the other. And then you basically have to fight each person in the club, starting at the most junior freshman all the way up to the captain of the club. And it's not for time, it's not for points. It's until the captain says yame, and then you go to the next one. So I think each person was around 45 minutes of fighting, which, isn't the most, but it's pretty intense. Well, I actually broke my finger on like my second opponent. We were going in, and I think I grabbed the dogi and to do an ashibarai and the takedown, and my finger, got wrenched, got caught in the dogi as I was doing the takedown to score the point. And I remember I got up and I helped him up, and I shook off my finger and I kind of went like this, and then I kept going, and 3 or 4 people later, I'm like, man, my hand hurts a lot. And I look down and my finger's all crooked. I mean, you can see it's still kind of crooked there, and that's after 2 surgeries, right? And I'm like, man, my finger hurts. And Senpai's standing there with his shinai, and he's like, okay, well, what are you gonna do? You gonna keep going? And I'm like, well, yeah. I'm gonna keep going. So I went. So by the time you get to the captain, the assistant captain and the captain, they're not really fighting you, right? They want you to just keep going, to keep punching them, and they'll knock you down, trip you, do ashibarai, do a takedown, just to get you to stand back up. And so it got to that point, and finally after I get to the captain, and vitally you're standing there and you're really just trying to keep punching, and then they call yame and you fall down and you're like, oh, thank goodness that's over. And the captain was like, well, do you want to go to the hospital now? I'm like, no, I'm not going to go to the hospital. We still got people to go here. So one of the managers brought me a cup of like udon tea, like iced udon tea, like this little cup. And I basically just stuck my hand in this cup of udon tea. And I'm sitting there in the dojo in Seiza with my hand in this lukewarm tea because it was the coldest thing we had. There's no ice. My finger's all crooked. So we continue, and then we had a tradition when these type of things were done. We had a big bottle of an ishobin, the big bottle of nihonshu, of sake, right? And
of course, Japanese tradition,
right? So, and it starts at the freshman, and it basically works its way up and down the line until the bottle's gone, right? And everybody's just doing their part to make this go away, and so we did that, and then the beer came out and the food came out, and finally it's like, it's starting to get dark. Maybe I should go to the hospital. So one of my senpai, he's like, okay, I'll drive you to the hospital. So he takes me to the hospital. We're there, and the doctor takes me into the x-ray room, and the x-ray specialist is getting ready to take my hand. Well, across the hallway was the bathroom, and my senpai was in the bathroom, taking care of the business that he needed to take care of. And the radiologist looks at me, and my chest is just covered in red marks from being punched and scraped and everything.
Yeah.
Well, right. And he looks at me, and he hears my senpai across the hall in the bathroom, and he's like, "Are you in a sports club?" I'm like, karate-bu, hi, karate-bu desu. And he's like, "Oh, okay." And he's like, it's like, it all makes sense, right?
Right.
As soon as you say that, like, everybody gets it. Yep. He's like, well, your finger's broken in 2 places. Both sides of the joint are fractured, but come back on Tuesday. Right? Because it's Saturday afternoon. So I go back on Tuesday, and they put pins in my hand. And this was in November, and I was supposed to leave in December. Well, at the same time, they told me right around this time, I think that week, they're like, okay, in 2 weeks, we go to Hombu Dojo and you take Shodan test. I was like, oh, I'm like, okay, that's fine. You go. So we went to the home. I'm like, what kata am I gonna do? Oh, you're just gonna do Basai Dai. So you go over there now, and you practice Basai Dai. I'm like, okay. So I went, practiced Basai Dai, and I don't know if we did Seienshin 2. We might have done Seienshin 2. But that was it. And then do my kata. And I remember in the middle of doing one of my yoku ukes, I banged my finger, and I'm like, right there at Hombu Dojo, which I'd only been to twice.
And who is the sensei? So you received your Shodan rank from the sensei there at the Hombu Dojo. Who is the sensei?
His name was Kuoko Kenwa.
Okay.
And actually, it's the son, the first generation was the one who tested me. It's now The third generation is in charge now. The son passed away, and now the grandson, he's I think about 5 or 6 years older than me. And I remember, so he passed away about a year after I went back to the States. But we only saw him a couple times. But he would, it was again a whole, he is whole totally different generation, right? But he was like, okay, good. I was like, that very little, like, okay, good.
Yeah.
So.
But that's a great accomplishment. And if you had not asked to extend that semester, you would not have made that Shodan there in Japan. I mean, that's good. So did you stay with Shito-Ryu after that?
So I went back at first to the Taekwondo school that I was at, and that was really hard. I mean, I just went back and I took off my black belt, I put on whatever Taekwondo rank I had, but it was really hard because the movement now was so different. The way that they moved and the way they did their kata, and I really struggled. So I got to go step back and say that my karate club was part of this Kenwakai. Well, and I grew up, I was living in Fairbanks, Alaska. Well, down in Anchorage, Alaska was one of the branch dojos of this Kenwakai. The instructor had been was my senpai in Nagoya Gakuin University. His name is Tanaka Katsutaka Sensei. And he was year 2, was like the first captain, or year 1 or year 2 of our karate club. And I was the 29th, year 29. So I first met him. He came to Japan once. So he would come back almost every summer, and he came to the university, and he just thrashed us one day, one Sunday or Saturday training session. And it was pretty tough training. But I knew that he was in Anchorage. But then I went back to Fairbanks, and I was in college, and I went to a local open tournament, and I see this guy, one of the other competitors, with the Kenwakai mark on his dogi. And I walked up and I was like, hey, you Kenwakai? And I'm like, I'm Kenwakai too, right? Like, I was at Nagoya Gakuin University. He's like, yeah, Tanaka Sensei is my sensei. He had moved up to Fairbanks to go to college. So we hooked up and we started training. And his name is Chris Hagen. And he's one of the senior referees now with the NKF. But we started training together. And I would go down to Anchorage, like when we had a school break, I would go down to Anchorage with him and train at Tanaka Sensei's dojo. So I kept doing Shito-Ryu, and I actually, because like I said, I only knew, when I got my Shodan, I knew 3 karate kata, plus a couple others that we played around with.
That's really interesting, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, think about that today. So many schools, I mean, we have 12 kata in our system, and to make Shodan, you don't have to know all 12. But there's other schools out there that have 50 kata, and to make Shodan, you probably know 25 of them, right? Or so you think you do. But basically knew 3, and you only had to perform 1 for your Shodan test.
1, maybe 2. I can't remember whether we did Seienshin or not for the Shodan test. I know for sure we did Basai Dai. I just can't remember whether we did a second one. And we did Kihon, and then some very light kumite. I mean, even that, my kumite, I had a broken finger, so they're like, okay, you can move a little bit. But, when you think about it, so I had a year of Taekwondo, and then a year and a half of karate. So essentially 2.5 years to Shodan. And I even asked him, I remember asking my friend about this when I was there. I'm like, this seems kind of early. And he's like, wait, we train every day for on average 2 to sometimes more hours a day, every day. Plus several times a year, we have 3 a day, or 3-day training camps, plus our summer gashiku, our winter gashiku, and every time there's a tournament, we'll do training camp leading up to that. So the volume of training that you've done in this year and a half is equivalent to what a person going just to a regular city dojo would do in 4 to 5 years. You're doing that because we're doing it every day, and especially because it had such an emphasis on Kihon. I mean, we would do easily half the class would be, Ido Kihon, where Uraken, all your blocks, and then moving Kihon back and forth, right? Zen Kuchitachi Gerambarai, Zen Kuchitachi Ageuke, Oizuki, Gyakuzuki, Maigeri, back and forth, back and forth. And then the Uchikomi and the Kumite practice for nonstop. And so, when you look at just the length of time, it seems very unusual. But when you look at the volume of training that happens in a university club, well, at least in the average university club, the way ours was at that time, the volume of training that we did was equivalent to 4 to 5 years worth of 2 to 3 nights a week for an hour to 2 hours.
Yeah. Because what blew me away when I moved here to Okinawa is a lot of people will only attend class 1 day a week, maybe 2 days a week, but they'll do it for 30 years, 40 years. And they're dedicated. They are, but that's their situation. There's other people that do it 4 days, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, or if you have your dojo at your house, but I was blown away because I thought, man, they're going to be there 7 days a week. Nope, that's not the case. Some people 1 day a week, they come in for 2 hours, they maintain their health, they move on out. But I understand 100% what you're saying there, the volume. I mean, you're basically getting an associate's degree, if you will.
To me, it kind of highlights the difference in philosophy between what a Japanese way of thinking about the black belt and Shodan versus a Western way of thinking about the black belt. Because really is, okay, you've done some Kihon now, good job, and now we can start some training. Now you might have the ability to actually understand what we're going to talk about and do some training. And I kind of thought, and now that I look back on it, I think that that's very, very true. And I always, when I'm working with athletes or students now, I always caution, like, look, Shodan doesn't mean that it's a great accomplishment, congratulations, but now we need to start the actual training. Now you should be understanding concepts. We could be able to talk about how to do things better, how you're supposed to progress, how bunkai is supposed to work, and things like that. Yeah.
So on to Hokkaido.
Hokkaido. So I talked my way into a Japanese Ministry of Education scholarship